There is a particular kind of invisibility that settles over a person who spends their days feeding others. It is not the invisibility of a ghost, cold and frightening. It is softer than that. More ordinary, it is the kind that happens when people are too busy reaching for the bread basket to notice the hands that filled it. When a woman stands behind a counter every morning at 5:30, when she ties on her apron before the sun has even decided to rise. When she knows every man in town by what he cannot stomach and what he craves, and not a single one of them knows her middle name. That was Nora Calloway. She had been cooking for the town of Harrow Creek, Wyoming for going on 6 years. 6 years of sourdough biscuits and elk stew. 6 years of sweet potato pie that men would ride 3 miles out of their way to get a slice of. 6 years of wiping down the same long wooden counter at the Harrow Creek boarding house, smiling at the same jokes, refilling the same coffee cups, and being thanked in the same brief, distracted way a man thanks a door for opening before him. She was not young, not in the way that turned heads at church. She was 41 years old with calloused hands and a quiet steadiness about her that the town had mistaken all these years for simplicity. They called her a good cook, a reliable woman. Harmless, useful, easy to forget. They did not know she had once set a dislocated shoulder on a cattle trail. They did not know she could read the sky like a sermon. They did not know that the winter of 1884 had taught her things about survival that no man in Harrow Creek had ever been tested enough to learn. But the blizzard of January 1887 was coming. And it did not care what the town thought of Nora Calloway. When it arrived, silent, white, and merciless, everything the town believed about her would be buried under the drifts. And what would rise up from beneath it would surprise every single one of them, including the rancher who had sat at her counter for 2 years without ever once truly looking at her. Harrow Creek was the kind of town that believed in its own smallness. It wore its modesty like a badge. 1 main road, 1 church, 1 saloon, 1 school, and the boarding house where Nora cooked, a long, low building with a covered porch and a wood stove that kept the whole front room warm enough to be worth the smell of old wool and pipe smoke. The town's population hovered somewhere around 300 souls when the weather was fair and ranchers came in for supplies. In winter, it felt considerably smaller. Nora had come to Harrow Creek in the autumn of 1881, following her husband Thomas, who had followed a land deed that turned out to be worth considerably less than the man who sold it had promised. Thomas Calloway had lasted 1 hard Wyoming winter before a fever took him quietly in his sleep, leaving Nora with $40 a mule. And a recipe for bone broth that her grandmother had whispered to her in a Tennessee kitchen 30 years before. She had not left. She was not sure exactly why, even now. Perhaps it was stubbornness. Perhaps it was that the sky over Wyoming was wider than anywhere she had ever been, and some part of her felt that wideness matched something inside her that had never found room to breathe before. She took work at the boarding house, cooking for the owner, a round-faced woman named Delia Marsh who was fair but distracted. Always half-occupied with account ledgers and the drama of which traveling salesmen were behind on their room rent. Delia appreciated Nora the way a person appreciates a good roof. Essential, unexamined, the regulars at Nora's counter were a reliable cast. There was Deputy Holt, who ate every meal as though it were a race. There was the Pierce brothers, cattle men who argued loudly and tipped poorly. There was old Reverend Drummond, who always asked if there was any news as though Nora were a newspaper. And then there was Cal Braddock. Cal ran a cattle operation about 4 miles north of town, not the largest in the county but respectable. He was 53, broad in the shoulders, slow in speech, with the kind of face that had been carved by decades of outdoor work into something hard but not unkind. He wore his gray at the temples and in his mustache. His hands were enormous. He almost always came to town on Wednesdays, tied his horse at the post outside the boarding house, sat at the far end of the counter, and ordered whatever Nora told him was best that day without ever questioning it. He had done this for 2 years, In 2 years, he had never once ordered without her guidance, but he had also never stayed a moment longer than the meal required. He said what needed to be said. He ate with focus, he nodded when he left. Nora did not think much about him beyond the fact that he preferred his coffee black and his biscuits not too brown on the bottom. She was not in the business of thinking much about any of them. That, she had long since decided, was how a woman survived in a town full of people who did not quite see her. Then came the first week of January 1887, and with it, a sky that Nora watched each morning with the particular attention she gave to things that worried her. It had turned a shade of white-gray she did not trust. Heavy and low and still, the kind of stillness that is not peaceful but patient, the kind of sky that is waiting for the right moment. She mentioned it to Delia. Delia waved a hand. "It is January in Wyoming, Nora. It is going to look like that." She mentioned it to Deputy Holt, who told her the almanac had not predicted anything severe. She did not mention it again after that. She simply began, quietly and without announcement, to do what she knew needed doing. She brought in extra wood. She checked the root cellar inventory and ordered double the flour and cornmeal when the supply wagon came through on a Thursday. She boiled extra stock and preserved it in jars. She found the spare lanterns in the back of the storage room and filled them all with oil. Nobody noticed, or if they did not say so. She was just the cook, cooking things, preparing things. That was simply what she did. Cal Braddock came in that Wednesday, same as always, and Nora set his coffee down before he had fully removed his coat. He looked at her. Not the way most men looked at her, through her, past her, at the board above the counter listing the day's food. He looked directly at her, which was unusual enough that she paused. "You look like you are thinking hard about something," he said. It was perhaps the most personal thing he had ever said to her. "Sky worries me," she said, and went back to the stove. He was quiet for a moment, then, "How so?" "Feels wrong, too still, too low." She slid a plate of beef and onion hash in front of him. "You got livestock out on open pasture?" "Most of them. Got a few yearlings in the east barn. I would think about bringing more in." He looked at the plate, he looked at the window, he picked up his fork. "You read weather?" he asked. "I read what I see," she said. "Lived through the blizzard of '73 on the trail west. Learned a few things a person does not unlearn." He was quiet again in that way he had that she had come to recognize as genuine consideration rather than dismissal. He chewed, he drank his coffee. Outside, a gust of wind pressed against the window glass with a sound like a slow exhale. "I will move more of them in," he said. She nodded and went to refill the coffee pot. That was the extent of it. That was as close to a conversation as they had come in 2 years. But the following Wednesday he came in, and when he sat down he said, without preamble, "Moved 11 more head into the north barn, like you said." "Good," she said. "You were on a cattle trail?" She set his coffee in front of him. "My husband had a trading arrangement. We moved a small herd from Missouri. He did not survive the first winter here, but the trail itself was not what took him." "I am sorry for it," Cal said. "It was a long time ago," she said. And then, because something in his tone made her feel it was safe to ask, "You lost someone too?" It was not a question exactly. He wrapped his hand around the coffee cup. "My wife Alina. 8 years back, fever." "I am sorry for it," she said in exactly the same quiet way he had. He nodded. And for a few minutes neither of them spoke, which should have been uncomfortable but was not. It was the first time Nora Calloway could remember sitting inside a silence with another person and not feeling the need to fill it with noise. After that, things between them shifted almost imperceptibly. Nothing a person could point to directly. He still came on Wednesdays, he still ordered by her recommendation. But he began staying perhaps 10 minutes longer than was strictly necessary. He began asking small questions. Had she always cooked, or did she learn it somewhere particular? Did she like Wyoming winters, or did she find them wearing? Had she ever thought about leaving? She answered honestly, without performance. She had learned to cook from her grandmother and her mother both. She found Wyoming winters hard on the body but clarifying on the mind. She had thought about leaving 100 times in the first 2 years and had not thought about it since. He listened in the same careful way he chewed his food, thoroughly, without hurry. She was careful not to read too much into it. Men talked to her, it was part of the work. She was a good listener, and the counter created a natural intimacy that strangers mistook sometimes for friendship. She had been caught by that before, offering warmth and receiving nothing in return but a departing back and a coin on the wood. But something about Cal Braddock was different in a way she could not quite name and was not ready to examine too closely. He did not talk to her like a man talking to the furniture. He talked to her like a man who had noticed something he was trying to understand. The town of Harrow Creek had opinions about most things, and it had opinions about Nora Calloway. She was well regarded in a limited sense, respected the way a workhorse is respected. Women in town liked her because she was not a threat. She did not chase husbands or borrow trouble. She kept her eyes down and her biscuits consistent. But that winter, a particular thread of gossip had started working its way through the town, quiet and persistent as a splinter. Cal Braddock, it was generally known, had been alone too long. His ranch was productive, his land good, and he was not yet old enough to be written off entirely. Several women in town had been quietly hopeful in that direction. Mrs. Gertrude Finch, who ran the dress shop and had been widowed 3 years prior, had made her interest known through a series of increasingly obvious gestures, attending the same church socials. Arriving at the general store precisely when Cal was known to be there, baking him a pie at Christmas and having her daughter deliver it to his door. Gertrude was younger than Cal by almost a decade, better dressed than anyone in Harrow Creek, and possessed of an opinion about every subject that she shared without being asked. She had never sat at the counter of the boarding house in her life. When she began hearing, through the particular social channel that connects every dress shop to every front porch in a small town, that Cal Braddock had been lingering at the boarding house counter at Nora Calloway's counter, she was, in the vocabulary of Harrow Creek ladies, troubled. She arrived at the boarding house on a Thursday morning under the pretense of speaking with Delia Marsh about a seamstress order, but she positioned herself near the counter long enough to say, within Nora's hearing, to another woman who had come for breakfast, "I suppose it makes sense that a lonely man would enjoy conversation with someone so available. A cook is always there, isn't she? Like a piece of furniture." The woman she said it to laughed lightly, in the way people laugh when they know something is unkind but do not wish to seem uncharitable by pointing it out. Nora was slicing bread at the time. She did not stop slicing. She did not change the expression on her face. She had heard worse and from closer quarters. But Delia had caught it too, and later that evening she found Nora in the kitchen and said, in her gentle, clumsy way, "You know how people talk, Nora. I just want you to be careful." "About expectations? I have no expectations," Nora said, and she meant it. "Cal Braddock is a well-thought-of man," Delia continued. "There are women who have set their caps, Delia." Nora turned from the stove. "I am 41 years old. I have been cooking in this kitchen for 6 years. The man comes to eat." "That is all." Delia nodded, visibly relieved, and said no more. Nora went back to the stove and did not let herself feel what she did not want to name. The sky outside the kitchen window had gone darker in the last 2 days. The temperature had dropped past the point where the wood in the yard popped and cracked from the cold. The air had taken on that particular dry bite that she recognized from years ago. From a night on a hillside in Missouri when she had packed straw around herself and her husband and prayed until morning. She went to bed that night and lay still and listened to the wind, and she thought it sounded like something heavy being dragged across the roof of the world. By morning, it had begun. The snow started as nothing, thin, polite, the kind of flakes that made children put out their tongues and old men say it would not amount to much. By midday, it had changed its mind. The wind came first from the north, then seemed to come from every direction at once, the way blizzard wind does. As though the sky has lost its sense of orientation and does not care to find it again. The temperature dropped so fast that the water trough outside the boarding house turned to solid ice in less than 2 hours. By late afternoon, you could not see the building across the street. Nora had known it was coming. She had been ready since before it started. The root cellar was stocked, the wood was in, the lanterns were filled. The stove was fed and the pot of soup on it was large enough to keep 6 people through a hard night. What she had not counted on was how many people would end up needing it. Deputy Holt had been making his rounds when the storm hit and made it to the boarding house before he could make it back to the sheriff's office. The Pierce brothers, who had come into town for supplies, were stranded. Reverend Drummond, who should have been home an hour before, had been sitting with a sick parishioner and now could not leave without risking himself in the white. There were 9 people in the boarding house dining room by evening, not counting Nora and Delia. And then the door opened one more time with a violence that sent a wall of cold air through the room and knocked 3 coats off their hooks. And Cal Braddock came through it with ice in his mustache and his hat so crusted with snow it looked like something carved. He pulled the door shut behind him with both hands. He stood still for a moment, catching his breath. "I came in to pick up a part from the hardware," he said to no one in particular. "I was not planning on staying." "Nobody plans this," Deputy Holt said from the corner where he was trying to warm his hands over a lamp. Nora was already moving. She brought a towel, a blanket, a cup of coffee so hot it steamed visibly in the cold air that still clung to him. He took the coffee and looked at her over the rim of the cup and said very quietly so only she heard, "You knew." "I had a feeling," she said. "I moved the rest of the yearlings in on Tuesday." "After you said about the sky." "Good," she said, and went back to the stove. That was when the real trouble started. About an hour into the storm's worst, there was a pounding at the back door. 2 of the men went to check it. They brought in a boy, maybe 12 years old, half frozen, who had been running an errand on foot between the blacksmith's shop and the general store when the blizzard had swallowed the road whole. He could not feel his left hand, and the right side of his face had gone white and waxy in a way that made Nora's stomach drop when she saw it. Frostbite, setting in fast. "Somebody get more blankets," she said, moving to the boy immediately. "Should we?" Deputy Holt began. "Warm water," she said, "not hot, warm." "Delia, I need the basin from the back room and the flannel strips from the linen closet." "Are you a doctor?" one of the Pierce brothers asked, not rudely but genuinely. "No," she said. "But I have seen this before and I know what to do." Warm water slowly, do not rub, do not apply direct heat. Keep him still and keep him warm. Nobody questioned her. Something in her voice had changed, not louder, not harsher, but more certain, like a road that had always been there but that nobody had bothered to follow before. They did exactly what she said. She worked over the boy for 2 hours, warming his hand gradually, watching the color and sensation return, keeping his spirits up with quiet conversation and a bowl of soup. She checked for confusion, for shallow breathing, for the particular kind of shivering that stops before it should. He was going to be fine. She knew it by the 3rd hour when he started complaining about his feet, which meant he could feel his feet, which was the thing that mattered. Cal sat nearby and watched all of it without saying a word. His large hands rested on his knees. He watched her the way a man watches something he thought he understood and is now revising entirely. Nora did not notice him watching. She was busy keeping a child alive. The storm did not let up by morning. It did not let up the following morning either. 36 hours inside one boarding house with 11 people tests everything: patience, charity, the quality of the cooking, and the particular talent some people have for deciding who is in charge when things go wrong. Nora did not decide she was in charge. It happened the way water finds the lowest place in a field, naturally, without announcement. She organized the food so it would last. She assigned sleeping spots to keep the oldest and the youngest warmest. She checked on the boy, whose name was Jimmy Harker, every few hours through the night. She kept the fire managed in a way that kept the room warm without burning through the wood too fast. And she kept everyone calm in the particular way she had always been calm herself, not by pretending nothing was serious. but by letting her own steadiness be the thing other people could borrow when their nerves ran thin. On the second night, the lamp in the far corner guttered and went out, and Mrs. Drummond, the Reverend's wife who had come looking for her husband and gotten stranded herself, began to cry quietly in the way older women cry when they are frightened but trying not to be noticed. Nora sat beside her. She did not say it would be fine. She did not offer empty comfort. She said, "I am going to tell you what I know to be true. The storm is bad, but the building is solid. We have enough food, the boy is recovering, and I have been in worse than this and come out the other side." Mrs. Drummond wiped her face. "Have you truly?" "Yes, ma'am." Truly, the old woman took a long breath and steadied. It was at some point in the second night, while most of the others were sleeping, that Cal found himself sitting across the long table from Nora while she mended a split in one of the blankets by lamplight. He watched her hands for a while, the calm, practiced way they moved. "You set frostbite before tonight," he said. "Several times," she said. On the trail, and once after when Delia's hired man got caught outside in a cold snap 3 winters ago. Delia did not mention that. I did not tell her who treated it. I just told her he was fine, he was quiet. Then why would you not say?" She looked up from the blanket. "Nobody asked." That sat between them for a moment. "I have been coming to your counter for 2 years, he said. "Yes, I did not know half of what you just told me these past 2 days. "No," she agreed. "You did not." He leaned forward and his elbows on the table made a sound that seemed loud in the quiet room. "Nora," he said, and it was perhaps the first time he had used her name directly, and the weight he gave it made it feel like something more than a name. "I have spent 8 years being a man who is careful not to look at things too directly," he said, "because when you look at things, you start wanting them. And wanting something at 53 years old is a considerable risk." She set down the mending. She looked at him. "What is it you are trying to say, Cal?" He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind pressed hard against the shuttered windows. The fire shifted and settled. "I am saying that I have been looking at the counter every Wednesday morning before I even get off my horse," he said. "And it is not for the biscuits." A silence followed that was nothing like the silences between them before. This one had weight, it had direction. "I am 41 years old," she said finally. "I know it. I am a cook at a boarding house. I have $30 saved and a mule. I share the pasture with Delia. I know that too. And you are a well-regarded man with land and cattle and a town full of women who would think you had lost your mind. I have never set a great deal of store by what towns think," he said. She looked at him for a long time. The lamplight made the gray at his temples look like something noble rather than something aged. "I am not an easy woman," she said finally. "I have opinions about whether. I will tell you when I think you are wrong. I cook because I love it, not because I have no other options." "I have not asked you to be easy," he said. "I have never particularly wanted easy." Something shifted in her face. Not a smile, not exactly, something quieter and truer than a smile. "Go to sleep, Cal," she said. "We can talk when the storm is finished." He did not argue. He moved back to his place near the wall, pulled a blanket over his shoulders, and was asleep within minutes. In the way of a man who has said the thing he needed to say and has nothing left to keep him awake. Nora sat by the lamp for another hour, finishing the mending, and did not let herself think too carefully about what had just been said, but her hands were steadier than they had been in years. The storm broke on the morning of the third day, not gently but all at once, the way a held breath releases. The wind dropped, the light changed. Through the single east window that faced the open sky rather than the main street, the sun appeared pale and clean over a world that had been completely remade in white. The men dug out the doors. The snow in the street was up past a man's waist in the drifts and knee-deep in the best places. The town emerged slowly, blinking, assessing damage, checking on neighbors, counting what had been lost. Jimmy Harker's father appeared at the boarding house door within the first hour, red-eyed from a sleepless night of worrying. And when he saw his son sitting at the table eating a bowl of Nora's oat porridge with both hands working properly and color back in his face, the man wept openly. Which was not a thing that happened often in Harrow Creek. He grabbed Nora's hand and shook it the way men shake hands with other men when the emotion is too large for words. "The whole left hand," she said quietly. "Warm water, no rubbing, no direct heat. You pass that along if you need to." He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, which she supposed he was. The Pierce brothers left without saying much, which was typical of them, but one of them paused at the door and said, "Good cooking, Miss Calloway," and then added in a lower voice, "Good everything else too," which was the most a Pierce brother had ever been known to say in the direction of a genuine feeling. Deputy Holt shook her hand. Reverend Drummond said a prayer that included a specific mention of her name, which he had never done in 6 years of Sunday services. His wife embraced her without asking first. Cal was the last to leave. He stood by the door with his hat in his hand, which was not his usual posture. He was usually a man who put his hat on and left efficiently without lingering. "I will come on Wednesday," he said. "You always do," she said. "I would like to come on another day too," he said. "If you would not find it an inconvenience." She regarded him with those steady gray eyes of hers. "I do not find you an inconvenience, Cal." He nodded once, put his hat on, and went out into the white morning. Delia appeared at Nora's elbow almost immediately. She had witnessed the exchange and had the look of a woman who has been carrying a suspicion for a while and has just seen it confirmed. "You told me there was nothing to it," she said. "At the time there was not," Nora said, and then quietly, "Things change." Delia was quiet for a moment, then, "He is a good man, Nora, I know it," she said. "And you," Delia continued with a firmness that surprised them both, "are considerably more than this kitchen." "I should have said so long ago." Nora looked at her employer and friend, this round-faced, distracted woman who had never been unkind, only preoccupied, and felt something warm move through her chest. "Thank you, Delia," she said. Then she turned back to the stove because there was cleanup to do and coffee to make and a counter to restore to order, and that was the work, and she had always loved the work. And loving the work had never meant she could not also love something else. That Wednesday, when Gertrude Finch heard from her source on the front porch network that Cal Braddock had been seen at the boarding house on a Monday and a Friday in addition to his usual Wednesday, she set her jaw and paid a visit to the boarding house herself. She came in the front door of the dining room while Nora was arranging the day's bread on the counter. She sat down on a stool she had never sat on before and she said, "I would like a cup of coffee, please." Nora poured it without expression. Gertrude wrapped her gloved hands around the cup and said, "I want you to know that I have no quarrel with you, Nora Calloway." "I did not imagine you did," Nora said. "I simply want to be sure," Gertrude continued with the careful articulation of a woman choosing every word, "that you understand what it is that Cal Braddock is." "What is he?" Nora asked. With genuine patience. "He is a man who has worked hard for 20 years and built something worth having. He is the kind of man that does not come along often." "He is," Nora agreed. "I have sat across from him for 2 years. I have some sense of who he is." Gertrude looked at her. She was not unkind, not truly. She was afraid. Nora could see it plainly. "I am sure you are a fine woman," Gertrude said finally. "I hope to be," Nora said. "It is only that—" Gertrude stopped. She looked down at the coffee. "It is only that you thought I was just the cook," Nora said without bitterness. Gertrude did not answer, which was answer enough. "I understand that," Nora said, and her voice was genuinely gentle. "Most people did. I cannot fault you for it." Gertrude finished her coffee. She set the cup down. She opened her mouth to say something else and then did not. She left a coin on the counter, which was more than she needed to, and she walked out with her back straight and her hat level. Nora watched her go. She felt no triumph. She felt something closer to a quiet, bittersweet recognition that the world has a way of categorizing people into what they appear to be. And that the cost of being invisible for a long time is not just what others miss in you, but what you begin to miss in yourself. She had almost forgotten these 6 years that she was more than the counter. Almost. Cal came on a Wednesday, as always. But he came on Fridays too now, and occasionally on a Monday if his work in town ran to the middle of the day. He never made a fuss about it. He sat at the same end of the counter. He had coffee. He talked to her. The town noticed, of course. Harrow Creek was constitutionally incapable of not noticing when two people began sharing an unusual amount of time. There was gossip, there was speculation. There were raised eyebrows at the church social in February when Cal arrived with a jar of honey from his ranch and handed it specifically to Nora in front of half the town. He had done it without ceremony, without announcement. He had simply held it out to her and said, "My hive had a better autumn than expected. I thought you could do something with it." She had taken it and said, "I can think of several things," and that was, in the opinion of everyone who witnessed it, as romantic as anything that had happened in Harrow Creek in recent memory, though each person who relayed the story added and subtracted something based on their own feelings about the matter. The spring came slowly to Wyoming, the way it always did, grudging and cold for a while before giving in. The snow melted in stages, revealing the ground in patches, the way truth reveals itself when conditions are finally right. One Saturday in late March, Cal rode out to the boarding house later in the day than usual, around the time Nora was finishing the evening's preparations and the dining room was quiet. He sat at the counter, but he did not order coffee. He sat with his hat in his hands and he looked at her, and she stopped what she was doing and looked back. "I would like to ask you something," he said. "Then ask it," she said. "I want to ask it right," he said. "I have been thinking about how to say it since January." She waited. "You are the most capable person I have ever known," he said, "and I have known some capable people. My wife Alina was a remarkable woman. I am not forgetting that, and I am not replacing her. But Alina has been gone 8 years, and I have been," he paused, looking for the right word, "I have been present, I have been functional. I have worked and I have eaten and I have slept and I have done all of it without any particular purpose beyond the ranch." He set his hat on the counter. "And then I started coming here on Wednesdays, and some part of me that had gone quiet started paying attention again." Nora did not move. "I am not a man who says things like this easily," he said. "I am asking if you would consider sharing your time with me in a way that is more than Wednesdays and coffee. I am asking if you would let me come to know you better. And I am asking if in time you might consider whether a life on that ranch with a man who is 53 and gray and not always easy to talk to might be something you could want." A long silence. Outside, the last of the winter wind moved through the eaves with a sound that was almost gentle. "You are easy enough to talk to," she said. "When you decide to say something," the corner of his mouth moved. "I have been on my own for a long time," she said. "I have learned to want very little. It keeps things manageable." "I know," he said. "I have done the same. Wanting something again at 41 years old," she said slowly, using his own words from the blizzard night back at him, "is a considerable risk. I know that too," he said. "I am asking if you will take it with me." She looked at him for a long moment, the lamplight, the gray at his temples, those enormous, careful hands. "I would like to see the ranch," she said finally. "Before I answer anything, I would like to see what I am being asked to consider." "Tomorrow morning," he said immediately. "Tomorrow morning," she agreed. He rode out the next day and she went with him, sitting beside him in his wagon with a lantern robe over her lap because the March air still had teeth in it. The ride was 4 miles of open land and big sky, and they talked some and were quiet some, and both felt equally right. The ranch was exactly what she expected and nothing like what she expected. It was a working place, practical and a little rough around the edges, with a barn that was better maintained than the house, which told her everything she needed to know about what he had prioritized in the years alone. The kitchen was functional but loveless, the kind of kitchen that feeds a man but does not nourish him. She stood in the middle of it with her hands in her coat pockets and looked around. "It needs work," he said from the doorway. "Most things worth having do," she said. She turned and looked at him standing in the doorway of his own home, big and quiet and terribly hopeful in a way that he was trying very hard not to show. And something in her chest resolved like the end of a long winter. "Yes," she said. He blinked. "Yes, yes," she said again. "I will consider it. I am considering it right now." He came the rest of the way into the kitchen. He stood close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes, which was not something she had often had to do. "I am not rushing you," he said. "I know," she said. "That is one of the things I like about you." They were married in June in the church on the main road of Harrow Creek on a morning that was warm and blue and absolutely ordinary. Which was exactly what they had both wanted. Reverend Drummond officiated, Delia wept. Deputy Holt wore his best shirt and still managed to look slightly disheveled. Jimmy Harker, the boy whose hand had come back to life in the warmth of Nora's care, sat in the front pew with his father, and when the service was done, he shook Cal's hand and then turned to Nora and said solemnly, "I am glad you knew what to do." Nora looked down at this boy with his two working hands and his untroubled face and said, "So am I." "Jimmy." "So am I." Gertrude Finch attended the reception and was gracious in the careful way of people who have accepted something they did not expect. She told Nora her biscuits had always been the best in town, and Nora thanked her sincerely because it was true and because she had long since stopped needing more than the truth. They say the blizzard of January 1887 was the worst Harrow Creek had seen in 20 years. The snow records that Deputy Holt kept in the sheriff's office confirmed it. 3 days of storm. Drifts up to a man's chest along the main road. What the record did not say was that during those 3 days, a woman most of the town had never really seen saved a boy's hand, kept 11 people fed and calm, and let a quiet rancher say something he had been holding onto for the better part of 2 years. Nora Calloway had not changed during the blizzard. She had not suddenly become something she was not. She had simply been given the kind of circumstances where what she had always been could not be overlooked anymore. That is the thing about invisible people. They are not invisible because there is nothing worth seeing. They are invisible because the people around them have not yet been forced to look. It sometimes takes a blizzard to make you open your eyes, to stop reaching past the hands that fill the bread basket and notice the hands themselves. To stop calling a person just a cook, just a widow, just a boarding house woman, and start asking who they were before the town decided what they were, Cal Braddock asked. And what he found was more than he had thought to hope for. And Nora, who had spent 6 years being essential and unseen, found that being truly looked at by one person was worth more than all the vague approval of a whole town combined. The ranch north of Harrow Creek became a better place with 2 people in it. The kitchen found its warmth, the barn kept its order. On cold mornings, the smoke from the chimney rose up straight and steady into a wide Wyoming sky, the kind of sky that does not judge what it holds but simply holds it. And on Wednesday mornings, sometimes Cal would still ride into Harrow Creek, not for supplies, not out of habit. He would tie his horse at the post outside the boarding house, go in and visit with Delia over a cup of coffee, and on his way out he would set a jar of honey on the counter, a small, quiet gesture that nobody much understood, but that the 2 of them understood perfectly. Some things are honey, you do not explain them, you only offer them and hope the right person knows what to do. Friends, thank you for riding along with us today here at Rusted Saddle Stories. If this story sat with you for a while, if it reminded you of someone who was more than the world gave them credit for, go ahead and let us know in the comments below. Stories like Nora's deserve to be told, and your company in the telling means more than you know. Leave us a like if you enjoyed the ride, and make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what comes next. We have got more tales of forgotten courage, quiet love, and frontier strength waiting around the next bend. Until next time, keep writing.